if we're bringing it back to the beginning, I born and raised in South Florida, just outside of Boca Raton, which is a more well-known city, but I was born and raised in Coral Springs. Went to high school in Fort Lauderdale at St. Thomas, and then moved my way over to FIU. I've been in Miami for the last 7 or 8 years. Quick story, when I was in college, I was actually pre-law, and that was kind of the path I was going down. I felt like that was what made the most sense at the time. I did an internship at the state attorney's office and realized that it wasn't for me at all.
Sure.
So I started doing research online about like side hustles and things that I could do as I was sort of dealing with the miserable lifestyle at the time. Kind of, you know, I was a criminal justice major with a certificate in political science. So I ended up finding this approach to real estate where you reached out to landowners across the country who were tax delinquent, and the county was on the verge of seizing their property. These were typically people who inherited the property or maybe fell in hard times. Way less common because you hold escrow on a primary residence if it's a house. So it was sort of a unique angle, and it really interested me. So I spent like a couple months doing a bit more research, trying to figure out if there was an angle there, and I actually found out that it didn't seem that too many people were doing it. I found a couple of content creators that talked about how they best practices, things like that, and that kind of helped me skip a lot of probably the growing pains I would have had to go through. And I started sending out mailers, and I spent the next 2 years more or less reaching out to tax delinquent owners across the country in an effort to contact them directly and see if they'd be willing to sell to me.
Sure.
Which was cool because it kind of gave me, that was my step into real estate. And it was super interesting. I would talk to people from all walks of life. It felt like the most common type of person I was talking to was a person who inherited the property, maybe didn't even know they owned it or wasn't entirely aware that they owed taxes on it. And for them, me stepping into it was a relief because it's like, I can offer this person 40, 50 cents on the dollar, pay their back taxes. And for them, they're getting this property off their hands. They don't have to worry about paying any taxes. And for me, I'm getting a property for, 40 cents on the dollar.
Sure. Do you know who Richard Garcia is?
I don't.
Okay, so he sells like a tax deed course.
Okay.
And I had a gentleman approach me, I don't know, a couple months ago or something. He messaged me, he's like, hey, what do you think about this guy doing the tax deeds and stuff? So I've never done the tax deeds. I'm aware of it.
Yeah.
I know how to find them and all those things. But I know a lot of people do sell courses on that, so that's an interesting.
It's cool. And I think what's interesting about it is that a lot of this information is available at a tax collector level.
Yeah.
So you can go to the city and you can print out a list of properties that are tax delinquent. It'll even tell you how delinquent they are. Now, different states have different laws regarding how long they could be delinquent for before they essentially go for auction. In some states, like for example in Florida, the way that I understand it and understood it was you can buy up they auction off the balance of the taxes, and then you accrue interest, and there are literally entities that buy these tax balances, and then when you pay it off, they get to keep the interest that occurs.
It's a very safe investment from that aspect.
Yeah, exactly.
People to buy those,
and the collateral is the property itself, which is it's so funny how many ways there are to make it in real estate.
Yeah.
It's just never ending. And then it actually pushed me in a lot of ways. It sort of pushed me towards the entrepreneurial side because there were a lot of hurdles I had to overcome. The interesting thing about, and this is probably still true of any industry, but like if you went to, for example, Marion County was one that I went to, and it was just like a prehistoric website. Like we're talking like the worst of the worst.
What's Marion County?
In Florida.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where is that located?
I think it's like near where Ocala is.
Okay.
Okay.
So like Orlando, like just outside of Orlando?
If I remember correctly. To be honest with you, I had tackled states outside of Florida and had never had any success. So all the deals that I did were in Florida. And then it was funny, it was less about geography for me. It was more so just about finding like either a list that was really easy to obtain. Like I think I remember Seminole County was pretty easy, and then I didn't tackle any big counties. Like I didn't even try for Miami-Dade or Broward, just because I felt like the competition would be too high. So there was a bit of a medium there. But Marion County, I remember, was one that like it was just archaic. Like the list was just a total nightmare. And I had a friend, still a good friend of mine, actually lives in my building. he's a programmer, and I was like, they essentially made you pull the tax delinquencies one by one. So you had to go in, and it would take like,
instead of just like
pulling a
filtering
list.
through it. Yeah.
So I looked at that and I was like, this is cool because nobody wants to do this.
Yeah.
It's already a smaller kind of like business to be in. So he created a program that was an automation that was clicking next, but it was pulling all the information, the mailing address, the tax amount. So we created an insane spreadsheet, which was cool. We were able to get some deals out of that. The biggest deal I did was in Cape Coral. It was actually a lead generation service that was selling leads, and you pay them a finder's fee. But I got a lot that was, after closing costs, which were like, I think $400, $500, but it was like 6,600, and I sold it 30 days later for 13,000.
There you go.
So it was just like, it was cool because I was like 20, 21 at the time, and for me that was like, I was basically like, we're ready to retire.
Yeah.
At that point, which
the first deal hits different.
Yeah. And it's funny too because like right before closing day, I was like, what am I gonna do with all this money? It was like $6,000 net or whatever it was, and then it hit, and then I remember thinking like, oh my God, what if I can never mimic that deal again?
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of real estate like professionals kind of deal with is like,
how am I going to do that?
Yeah. You're a broker, you close a big deal, you're excited about it, you close it, and you're like, what if I could never replicate that? So that was cool. And then I ended up partnering with a guy. I was like really big on reaching out to people on forums because it's one of those things where I wanted to learn from other people's mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So there was one guy that I reached out to. It was incredible to me. Just as a pointer, I think this might resonate with you, but it is so impressive to me how a lot of people that have already done it are so willing to like give you free advice, give you free game, kind of like give you insight. So I sent him this long email, which in retrospect, it was kind of naive of me because I asked him a ton of questions, and he responded to every single one of them.
That's awesome.
Him and I ended up becoming friends. We partnered on a couple deals, and I was like thinking, I'll put more money into marketing efforts, and this might be the full-time thing I do in lieu of law school. And I'll never forget, he called me one day, and we had worked on a couple deals, and he was like, hey, he was a land broker in Virginia, and he was like, hey, my brokerage is really taking off up here. A lot of the deals we did were smaller, and he was working on like, massive plots of land, a couple $1 million, whatever. So he was basically like, the return on my time is better spent brokering land up here than it is like working on these like $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 lots where we were making like a good spread, but you get a commission on a $2 million piece of land. It's definitely time better spent. Yeah. And it broke my heart because he was like a good friend of mine, and I deferred to him for a lot of questions. And he was also the constant in our dynamic because I'm like an optimist. So like we'd have someone inquire with like a $200,000 plot of land, and I'd be like looking up, nice cars online, like this is going to be sweet. And he'd be the guy that's like, wait, we need to figure out, we need to do our due diligence. So that kind of, it helped me a lot because I was young at the time, sort of naive. And anyways, I sort of continued. One thing led to another, and he gave me a call one day. We were just chatting, and I told him, I was like, I'm not really sure which direction I want to take things in. He's like, my brother is in property management in South Florida. You should give him a call. We all ended up going out to dinner to Shooters in Fort Lauderdale. A couple months later, he gives me a call, hey, I need a leasing guy. And that was my intro into property management. And at the time, I knew very little about multifamily. I knew very little about what management looked like. I'm really grateful that it worked out that way because I got introduced to property management. I was the leasing guy for 250 units. I did them all myself. We leveraged self-showing systems, which we can get into when we talk about the tech and real estate. But that was sort of my intro into property management, and I think leasing specifically was really unique because it really is, in my opinion, like I think management companies as a whole are the backbone of real estate, but I think leasing specifically is the backbone because we're determining like what the market rent might be. Like vacancy factors are huge when you're analyzing an investment. So getting a qualified tenant in as quickly as possible at the best rate possible. So there's sort of a medium there that you have to get in tune with. as a leasing agent. And we managed properties of all shapes and sizes. So whether it was like a 50 unit building that was all Section 8, or a single family that was renting at that time for $4,000 or $5,000 a month, which these days is probably renting for like $10,000-$15,000 a month. But yeah, and that was kind of my intro into property management.
Okay, so did you drop out of FIU or did you finish?
I finished.
Okay, you finished.
Yeah.
So you have a
bachelor's degree. No, I didn't go to law school. So I got my bachelor's in criminal justice, which serves me absolutely zero value at this point. Maybe that'll change at some point. Actually, I've had my fair share of interesting interactions in property management that a criminal justice degree might have some value in. But I did get my degree and I guess I didn't really use it, so to speak. I didn't need it. Nothing I've ever done in real estate has required a degree outside of my time at Crexy, I think. But as far as like management and brokerage, it was, the barrier of entry is actually fairly low, I'd say.
You said you went to FIU too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you hear what FIU just did with Pitbull?
I saw your post about it, right? He's paying $1 million a year.
1.2 million per year to name that stadium Pitbull Stadium.
I'm proud.
So it's going to be interesting to see what he shakes
yeah.
down. But I know the FIU world's going crazy. Right
Yeah. Dude, I got all the Panther pride that no one can have. It's funny. I went there. Admittedly, like I wasn't super excited about it because it was just I went to St. Thomas, so a lot of people I knew were going to like. UF was really common. FSU was super common. We had people from our grade, I think a handful that went to even Harvard, some of the major schools. So like FIU was not necessarily the most sought after school for my graduating class. But it was funny because I met some of the best people I've ever met there. Not only that, but I think that they're doing a great job, like pushing themselves, like as far as ranking academically. I know that
I think recently, they've been killing it.
Yeah, they've been killing it. So it's been cool, sort of being a FIU alumni, so I'm really proud of that. But yeah, it's funny, my degree didn't serve me at all, but I still get to rep it as much as I can. So I still need to get my FIU license plate one of these days. Yeah, they're going to go up in stock after the football announcement.
That's right.
So I was at that firm, my introduction to property management, I was at that firm for 3 years, and I learned a lot during that time. There are a lot of reasons I love property management. I think it's actually one of the most underrated aspects of real estate. There are a lot of reasons, but I'd say the main one is it really, I don't know if there's a more valuable space to be in as it relates to learning the business.
Sure.
We also had a brokerage leg, and towards the end we were also getting ready to start raising money, which was cool because I was really being exposed to multiple different aspects in real estate. But
it's crazy how creative real estate is and how many different arms and different sections it has.
It's
property management, raising capital, brokerage, commercial, residential, industrial, like it's insane.
Yeah, and then you got like you have these different legs, and then you have like people that are vertically integrated.
Yeah.
So they try to do everything at once. Some do a great job and some do an awful job.
Yeah.
So it's interesting kind of being in property management because you come across a lot of people that consider themselves as vertically integrated. But the thing is, a lot of these people are jack of all trades, king of none, which there's benefit to that. And at a certain level, I think that you can get away with that. But at a smaller scale, especially when it relates to being like a player in a market, you want to understand the local market. And I think there are a few people that can do that better than a property manager or, a realtor or, the local real estate professional. And it was cool because as a leasing guy, I got to understand, like, I was really understanding different zip codes. Like at the time, this was out of Fort Lauderdale, so you could give me a zip code, a bedroom count, and I could give you a very reasonable range of how much like a 2-bedroom would rent.
Yeah.
That area, I knew the Section 8 standard. I knew how long it would take on average to get a unit rented.
Just the metrics.
Yeah, so
all the metrics. And
when I left, we were just shy of 800 units. So another cool aspect of management is that when you get to a certain level, you can actually have meaningful insights into rental markets, especially when you're spanning across multiple properties. If you've got like a single 300 unit building, that's one thing, right? Because it's all consolidated into one area. But like we had, I think, over 90 properties amongst those units. So we're getting insights into like different demographics, into like if there's a collections issue that we're seeing across multiple types of properties. So it was a really cool way not only keep up with the market, but again, for me to learn the business, because I got to see, 60 days out, we start the renewal process, right? We're running comps to see what the rent is for that unit. We're negotiating with the tenant. If we can't come to agreeable terms, they're vacating the property, at which point, right before that, we're starting pre-marketing, we're doing showings, and then we're also negotiating rental prices. If we find a great applicant that's on the fence, you got to get creative with how you're going to get them in there, because like I sort of mentioned earlier, as a leasing guy, you want to get the best price for the best applicant as quickly as possible. So it's more of an art than a science.
Yeah. So what's that? I know that there's a couple of places out there right now that'll do, I don't even know, like security deposit alternatives.
Yeah.
And can you go through a little bit about those alternatives that you see? Because I know in Miami in particular, a lot of these buildings are using something, because a lot of people today don't have 1 month's rent for security deposit.
For sure.
On a $3,000 a month rental.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
For sure.
it's then they're in $6,000. I know with the condos that we do as realtors, if you're going to rent out a property, it's first, last security deposit.
Yeah, and sometimes an association deposit.
Yeah. Sometimes. So you're looking at, on a 1-bedroom, let's call it, I don't know, $3,000 a month. You're at $9,000 moving costs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. Can you go into that a little bit?
For sure. So we actually blew up right around COVID, and I think one of the reasons that we were able to do that was because we adapted very quickly. We can get into this a little bit, and I'm going to answer your question, I promise.
Yeah.
But property management as a whole, as an industry, is very antiquated. If anyone that's listening to this, if they were to go on to, property management companies near me, I would guarantee at least 70 to 80% of the sites that you're looking at look like they were built in the early 2000s. And a lot of property managers aren't with the times. I think that's changing a little bit, but we were very tech forward, which I think really allowed us not only to grow on the business development side, but also really gave us a leg up when it came to vacancy and renting units. One of the things that we did was we partnered with a company, or I shouldn't say partnered, it's sort of dramatic, but we worked with a company that allowed us to do no deposit option for tenants. And as you know, especially in Miami, but nationally, there's a major affordability crisis. So while other companies were still asking for first, last, and deposit, we were asking for first, and then they were enrolling into this policy that was giving them coverage from anywhere from 1 to 2 months. So in some cases, we still got 2 months worth of coverage, and then they still paid their first months in cash. Because you always want to collect something and move in. I mean, really at a minimum, 1 full month if you're doing policies like that, because you want to be able to show that this person has the capacity to pay the rent. And then of course, if they have a weak application, you can look at 2 months coverage. And what it essentially was it was insurance. So they would pay a monthly fee, anywhere, at that time it was anywhere from $25 to $50 depending on the amount of coverage and their credit profile. And that was a fee. It wasn't like a refundable thing that they were paying. That was something they were paying on a monthly basis. And that was huge. It felt like especially for, surprisingly, for the lower cost units, or not surprisingly, but you would think that'd be huge for the $4,000, 3-4 bedroom, because we're talking $12,000 versus $4,000. But it was really big for the lower income people who, again, are dealing with the affordability crisis. It's massively beneficial for them to be able to tap into a program where they can just pay first month's rent, and then we can get into ancillary revenue in a little bit, but that was a way for us to produce additional income because we charge a risk fee.
You charge a risk fee because they're...
Yes. So we call it's like an administrative fee.
Person? Okay.
And not even that, everyone paid it. So if you enrolled in the program, everyone paid their first month's rent at $400, which for a lot of people was a no-brainer, because the alternative, a lot of the competitors were 3 months.
So you want to pay an additional $400 or an additional 2 months?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So as an example, it's either you're paying for a $2,000, let's call it 1 bedroom, you're either paying $6,000 or you're paying $2,400. And it's some people don't even have the option to pay the $6,000. So it's they're going to pay $400 easy. And it was a great revenue stream. Honestly, it was a great way to make extra money.
What was the company called that was doing that insurance?
Right, it was called Rhino. The website was getrhino.com.
Yeah, I've heard. Okay.
And they were called Rhino. There's
I've
a couple.
heard that term, and I've heard of their company a lot more recently. I think it's kind of growing in.
Yeah, for sure. They're New York based. We ended up moving away from them towards the end because the policies were getting too expensive. I have a
They
feeling
kept raising the price.
they kept raising the cost that was going to the tenants. So like we had like some Section 8 tenants that they were asking for like $100 a month on like a $2,000 policy, and it's just like they're gonna end up paying $1,200 in fees rather than just paying $2,000 deposit, and like that's not really that beneficial for them,
Yeah.
whatever the case might be. Because if they're staying there for a couple years, they're paying that fee monthly no matter what.
Yeah.
So it's specific. It's really beneficial.
It's literally an insurance company, is what that Rhino is. So it's like it's all risk adjusted. Like they have to be pulling in more premium essentially than they are paying out. They're probably getting a lot of claims. So it's, to me, like just that it's a very interesting thing. It's kind of a new type of insurance.
Yeah, and something I didn't realize actually was they go after the tenant if there are damages. So they're not even just covering the damages. So for example, like
They're basically just covering the loss to you.
yes, so
and then they go and then they pursue
reclaim.
Yeah.
So like this tenant pays them $50 a month for a year, $600, and then that tenant occurs $600 worth of damage. They still have to pay that $600.
Sure.
So it's a little bit. It's interesting. Now there are.
It sounds like a literal regular insurance company.
Yeah, it's
like,
crazy. It's
like,
crazy.
like it doesn't really make sense, but everybody has to have it.
Yeah, and it's going to get bigger and bigger as we deal with this like affordability crisis, which
Absolutely.
is crazy.
Absolutely.
And something I'll say real quick is that another thing I think was unique at the time is that I think a lot of these bigger community rentals, like some of the ones in downtown, for example, they offer these programs because like these are like sort of luxury community rentals. My parents live on one Las Olas, and you know they had a no deposit option offered to them as well. It's not as common in the for rent by owner sign out front. This guy's not going to have a a no deposit option.
I think
insurance
Rhino
program.
has a limit to how many units they
Minimum
serve.
units,
Like
yeah.
yeah.
Now, some companies, for example, the guarantors, they do not have a minimum
I've heard of
unit
them as
count.
well.
Now, the thing is, like, you have to, their fees are pretty, in my opinion, outrageous. You end up having to pay 30% of the amount of coverage that you need. I think it's around there, could be 20 to 40. But to me, it's just like, I would rather pay a month as a deposit than pay, to use that same example again, $2,000. I'd rather pay $2,000 as a deposit than $700, whatever, $666. Then
monthly fee after.
yeah, and then you get fees and stuff, and then they still come after you.
And if you can't afford that, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to. Like a lot of people couldn't say, "Hey, I would rather pay that $2,000." So then you just got to swap locations, like geographical locations, and you might not get into a as desirable neighborhood or community or whatever. But like, okay.
Yeah, so and that gave us a leg up because we were offering that Rhino at the time, which I think we were at the beginning of COVID. Again, we were at like just probably shy of 300 units, and and it was really valuable because while everyone was trying to save a buck, we were asking for 33% of what everyone else was asking for, whatever with the fee. It might have been like
that fills units.
Huh?
That fills units.
Yeah, for sure.
Fills units.
For sure. So it gave us a big advantage as it relates to like not only other rentals, and then another thing that happened, which has since changed, but MLS changed their kind of, or Zillow rather, made it so that you had to pay to list your units on there, and they no longer syndicated from MLS. Now it's back to, they're doing it again, but Zillow
It's like a $30 a month, or
there's like a
3-month thing or whatever.
It used to be more expensive, and we were paying it because honestly, you saw a significant reduction in Zillow listings for rentals. They've always syndicated for listings on sales, but for rentals, it wasn't taking from MLS anymore. It is again. But we knew that, and there were a lot of realtors who were kind of fly-by-the-night listing agents for leases, and they didn't know that. Mm-hmm. So that was another big advantage because we were getting all these listings directly on Zillow, and like I guarantee 90% of people listening to this, if they're going on and looking for a rental, Zillow's going to be top 3, if not number 1.
Yeah.
Now that's changed since then, but that gave us an advantage at the time, and that's part of like hiring a knowledgeable property manager is you want to know someone that knows those kinds of nuances, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting
thing.
I wasn't even aware that Zillow ever stopped.
Yeah.
When was that? What year was that? Do you know?
That was 2020, 2021. Because
Okay.
they really, I mean, they had like a really pretty significant monopoly. Like right around COVID, they had like a bunch of programs that they had the home buying program that they've stopped that, right?
Zillow, yeah.
Yeah, they were doing that. They're not doing it anymore.
On the real estate side, as far as realtors go, they just bought Follow Up Boss. So this is what's happening.
Yeah.
This is the latest drama with Zillow and us realtors is, so Zillow bought Follow Up Boss, which is a CRM that basically everybody uses.
Yeah.
So in the CRM, you go and you put your contact information, their address, their phone number, their email, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mark the lead as like super hot, like they're ready to sell, or maybe just a lead and they're not that ready, but you want to nurture them.
Yeah.
So if you mark them as super hot, Zillow now
Get the
is
data.
marketing listings, right? So they're going to go to that person. They have their phone, email, and address.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to hit them from all three. Back, bang, 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 bang. And
Insane.
they're going to try to get that listing and then give it to one of, I don't know, their agents or sell the listing. Like, so they're just reselling all of this information that they have people collecting for them. Basically, like me. Like, I'm making cold calls. I go out and put that into Follow Up Boss, for example. They're going to target that.
Yeah.
And they're going to know it's a hot lead because I have it marked as a hot lead, and they're probably going to try to get that listing.
Yeah.
So it's like a direct competition. So that's just my little spiel on Zillow.
That's insane.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
They got a really solid monopoly. I know that they sell their leads over and over and over again. So it's interesting.
Yeah. I think a lot of the, I don't remember who I was talking to about it. One of the guys that we were with last weekend, the whole lead purchasing industry is incredibly shady. I did a couple months in, I think this is sort of a rite of passage for wannabe entrepreneurs in college, but I did a couple months at Northwestern Mutual. I don't know if you have any friends that did that.
Absolutely.
And I was like, I found this lead purchasing software that I was like, I hit a gold mine here. Like, I'm about to be rich. And then I bought a bunch of leads, and like I was calling people. They were like, "I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, take me off your list." It was like I was cold calling.
Yeah.
But then it's funny. I dug a little bit deeper, and then I found out that like it was just like a known thing that they were zero value.
Reselling leads.
Reselling, sometimes even like not even like real leads. We mentioned earlier sort of vertical integration. And I think there's a law of diminishing returns when you're too vertically integrated. You try to do everything, and then you end up scattering your time. I actually think that as far as the totem pole of real estate goes, property managers are pretty close to the bottom as far as return on time goes and as far as like equity goes. Because I think, you know, it depends on who you're asking and, you know, how good someone is at their job. You know, realtors, I'm sure, that work 40, 50 hours a week don't make much. You know, realtors that work 10, 20 hours a week and make, you know, 300, 400,000. So it's obviously relative, but I think on average, you know, pound for pound, the return on time that a property manager gets is probably the lowest. Having said that, when you integrate some other components into your property management business, it very quickly becomes profitable. One, and two, once you reach a certain size as a property manager, it's like economies of scale.
Yeah.
Is that like you charge like let's just as an example, you charge like somehow figure out how to charge a $5 fee to 1,000 tenants, and you do that, it's net, right? So you're just charging whatever $5 fee, a processing fee, whatever the case might be. That's $60,000 worth of income.
$5,000 a month.
Yeah, so it's just like if you're managing 30 units, that's like not a meaningful amount. But at 1,000 units, it really starts to make sense. But at any rate, as far as like the things that attracted me to property management, to circle back to that vertical integration thing, is that when you're a broker, especially in investment sales, a lot of these realtors, and I'm sure you've heard of this before, I know you do a great job with this, but maybe not using Follow Up Boss, but a lot of these realtors will close and then you never hear from them again. Mm-hmm. And I've had listings where I'm like talking, you know, I'm having conversations with the buyer's agent, and they're just pitching numbers to a buyer that are just completely unrealistic. And I think when you're a property manager representing a buyer, there's a level of accountability, because if you tell someone like, hey, we've got 10 units here, rents are $1,200, I think we can get them up to $1,500, you broker that deal, you get the buy side commission, you're now also responsible for delivering on the numbers that you promised. You can't kind of plead like, oh, I didn't know this, I didn't know that. Your job is to deliver on the numbers that you promised as part of the due diligence, which makes it more stressful, but also I feel like it offers a level of confidence with investors that you're working with. Also, it just gives you such a great insight into the business. I know I've sort of touched on this a couple times, but when you're dealing with collections, when you're dealing with just like maintenance issues, which obviously I was a leasing guy, but you're still able to touch some of these different components of it. You get to learn how to deal with people. You get to understand like what drives people, how to get, like, for example, we dealt with a ton of issues where we were having so many applications that people were like complaining about, paying $100 for an application fee and being rejected. We were getting kind of feedback like, oh, you're just trying to make money off of us for multiple applications in every unit. And it taught me how to deal with, it was customer service. Like it taught me how to deal with a disgruntled customer. Day in, day out, like there were people that were on the phone, like complaining about X, Y, and Z. And it taught me how to be like, hey, I'm on your team. Like I want the same thing as you want. I want to get you into a property. However, deferring to a sort of higher authority, like the owner said they want X, Y, and Z. You don't have it. I wish there was more I could do for you. But it kind of displaces the blame. And there were so many things I learned, and that are even more beneficial when you get to higher levels, right? When you get to bigger deals, like bigger properties, bigger risk, so on and so forth. Another thing that I like about it is, I know I mentioned being able to get market insights. I really like the fact that it keeps you in touch with owners. So like a realtor is like, again, I think for like primary residences, what they buy every 7 years, something like that.
On average, yeah.
Yeah, investment sales a little bit different. Obviously, some are buying like once a year, multiple times a year. It ranges, of course. But as a property manager, like you're the guy that like the owner's talking to. And if you're delivering, if you're showing that you're able to deliver on the promises that you make, these investors want to work with you. They're like, hey, this guy has done everything that he said he's going to do. Go ahead.
That's true.
Yeah.
You're like the operations, like your boots on the ground, like you're there doing the, like.
Yeah. We had owners that would go, that worked with like big name brokers. We're talking like, some of the bigger brokers. I won't name any, but that would essentially be like, we want you to represent us because we want you to do the inspection. We want you to look at the rent roll. We want you to handle the delinquency, and so on and so forth. Not that the realtor would handle the delinquency, but they just wanted us to be the people that handled it, all the way through. Now, obviously, we coordinated referral fees on that kind of stuff. But it was just surprising because a lot of these guys were purely brokers. They were great at their jobs. But for some reason, these owners felt more comfortable dealing with someone that they knew were going to be hand-holding them the whole way. Yeah. Like, hey, like we not only understand the market because we're leasing, 799 other units just like this one, but also we know how to get it done.
One interesting thing. So all this management talk that we're talking about takes me back to a couple of things that came on early in my career. One was meeting Grant Cardone, and one was meeting Robert Martinez. Two wildly different philosophies on property management companies, and all this talk really reminds me of that. So Grant, for example, was not vertically integrated, swore by that one of the biggest mistakes Robert was making at this time was that he was vertically integrated and managing his own property management company. Mm-hmm. Grant at the time, I don't even know, this was maybe 4 years ago, had maybe $2 billion, $3 billion in real estate, something along that line. Now, I got pretty close with both of them, which was really cool. But like, it was so interesting. Grant wanted nothing to do with property management at all. He was like, "That's your biggest downfall. Never open a property management company. Only hire external property management companies. Don't give them a partnership. Pay them the monthly fee, or pay them the fee. Keep it that kind of relationship, right?" Robert, on the other hand, had maybe $500 million in real estate or $1 billion, somewhere around there. He's out of Houston, Texas. He had a vertically integrated business. He swore by the management. He swore by it.
Yeah.
He swore in-house everything. Like I'm talking, this man was like, no, this is why I've been able to get this far, all these things, all that thing. But it was just interesting to see and compare their two different mindsets, mm-hmm. where they're at, how they operated their businesses differently. Because I've always, I guess, struggled I've always thought, okay, does it make sense to start a property management company? Does it not? And I still don't know the right answer, I guess, but
don't do it.
It's yeah. I don't. It's like it's so interesting. I think it is a skill that everyone has to learn, though, as like property owners, right?
Sure.
Like if you're gonna buy property and you only have 5 units or 3 buildings or whatever, maybe like you have a single family and 3 duplexes, like you probably don't want to pay, or maybe. I don't know, it depends, I guess, but you probably don't want to pay somebody to manage that property for you.
Yeah, what I would say is like property, because you're talking about like the consideration of getting involved in property management, and like property management in and of itself is a business, and understanding the business of property management, in my opinion, is understanding the business of real estate.
Yes.
Because it allows you to understand the operations. It allows you to analyze a deal, to look at like what kind of operating expenses you're going to be looking at, so on and so forth, in a way that I don't think most other professionals in real estate are able to do. And that's why I think it is as valuable as it is. Because I said earlier, like I actually think it's one of the lowest returns on time as far as like what you put in versus what you get out. But that level of understanding the business there's almost nothing more valuable than being in the weeds and understanding like how to analyze investments, like how to get things running, how to kind of like optimize unit turns, how to optimize vacancy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of investors that, like, let's say you start a real estate fund, right? And you go and you raise all this capital from investors. So then you have the LP and the GP. The GP people, sometimes they won't even invest in a deal if there's no management company in the GP, because they want you guys to have skin in the game, because you're boots on the ground, like you're there running the operations. Like it's not the GP that's just raising the capital that's going to go effectively implement all this stuff at the property. Like you have to I think a lot of people don't understand that you have to operationally increase the value of the property. You don't just buy a property and, like for example, let's say you go buy a property here in Miami. Let's say it's 20 units. You got to meet your 1.25 debt service coverage ratio to get a loan. So you're bringing today, I don't know, 35% down payment, right, to even get that property. Then you're probably losing money at that 35% down payment. So then it's your job to operationally increase that revenue or the NOI, and then drive that property value up. Yeah, you can sit on appreciation and wait, but you're also bleeding money on the back end. $10,000 a month. Because real estate has become the biggest, hottest investment vehicle there is. So it's like, there's a lot of value in that, and I think a lot of people think that they can just go and buy real estate without ever, like, getting their boots on the ground or figuring out the management game. Like, that's an essential part of the business.
For sure. Two things to that. One, we talk about like increasing revenue, increasing NOI, and a lot of people think bumping rents. But it's not just bumping rents, it's optimizing your expense ratio.
Decreasing expenses.
Yeah, so it's like
two options.
Yeah, so, and you can do both, you can do one or the other, but you have to increase NOI somehow. So as a property manager, like that's again another way where you look, okay, my repair expense ratio should be, let's say, around 4%. You look at a property, you're looking at their OM, and obviously a lot of that stuff gets fluffed up. But
absolutely,
Well, let's say they're honest, and it's not like an 8%, right? You're gonna know, okay, if we standardize this, we get it done, or we optimize this. Our pro forma, we're looking at closer to 4%. That's a way that a property management company almost pays for themselves, right? And that's a way that a property manager adds value. That's one, real quick. Two. And you know more about this than I do, but I know certain funds will invest in asset classes, right? So it's a little bit more broad. It's maybe multiple properties, but I know that a lot of syndicators, especially ones that are just getting started, are investing in a property, right? And maybe the LPs are like, hey, we want to make sure that you have a property management company in place, so that way we know that there's someone who knows what they're doing as part of the due diligence process. And it's interesting to me because we've managed properties that for syndicators. And it's just like they're like, hey, we need reports, so that they can translate these reports and then pass them on to the investor. And it's just funny because I really think at that level, not at a fund level, but at that smaller level, the GP is a bit of a redundancy because they're just translating the reports that are coming from the management company, because they're saying, okay, here's what's going on with vacancies, here's what's going on with repairs, and they're just getting all this information and synthesizing it from the property manager. Obviously, it's a bit more nuanced than that, but I do think that property managers are in a unique position to raise money because of that.
See, yes, okay, yes, I agree with you 100%. If a property management company just figured out how to raise capital, they would be the most optimal, I think, or could be the most optimal fund manager, essentially, or syndicator, whatever you want to call it, because they're boots on the ground, they have that. But again, it goes back to you were saying, how many property managers, if you have a property management company and you're spending all that time in the operations and managing those people because those people don't show up to work, the painters never come, it's just a property. It's just a management game.
Yeah.
You're managing property, but the owner of the property management company is managing people. I feel like is it a high turnover industry?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure.
Exactly,
Yeah,
high turnover industry.
Yeah.
Like
unless you align your incentives, I think there's a lot to be said for aligning your incentives with people that are on your team. I've met property managers that are very profit driven, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's at the expense of the people they're working with.
Yeah.
And I've also met people where their interests are like, hey, how can I build a team where everyone's winning? And that's when I think you find that sort of balance between
profitability and
having
happy
a good
people,
team.
low turnover.
Yeah.
So, but that property manager is focusing all their time on that, managing the people, etc. Then you need a partner that is good at marketing, social media, raising capital, all those things. So that's typically where it becomes the smash together.
I think that boils down to, and I think honestly, in general, this is such a big requirement for building an empire. I'm sure a lot of people you talk to would at least agree with this on some level, but as I've had conversations over the years with like successful investors, successful brokers, mortgage bankers, like insurance guys, it really boils down to having the right team. So like if you're an investor, you want to have the right team in the sense that you want to have a good property manager, you want to have a good broker, maybe they're the same, you want to have a good insurance guy, so on and so forth. And then you kind of like go a little bit further than that. As a property manager, you want to have a good team. You want to have people that you can trust. And I think once you build that, you can build outward, but first you have to start inward.
Yeah.
And that goes back to like aligning incentives, like, making sure that people feel like they're a part of something, which that I mean, it sounds a lot easier than it actually is.
Yeah.
Because you have to find someone that is capable, one, and two, if they're not capable, they're willing to learn how to be capable. Because I think the problem is a lot of people are just kind of like I want it done for me, or like this is a little bit too much, like I'm done at 5,
yeah.
like call me on Monday. Which it's funny, I've been on the other side of that, because when you're in a position where you don't feel valued or you feel like you're kind of being taken advantage of, it's like I'm gonna do what we agreed to do. But it's like when you're part of an environment where you feel like I'm part of something, like I've been a part of that as well. And it's like, I'm so happy to take that call at 8 p.m. on a Saturday. I had an ex-girlfriend who would get really upset with me because like it would be Sunday, like at 1 p.m., we'd be hanging out and I'd be like, I have to take this call right now. But it's because you want to do it.
Culture.
Yeah, it's culture. It really is culture. I think good culture is the backbone of any good business, as property manager is the backbone of any good investment.
Property management, as far as like the people that own just a couple units, like let's say they own like a single family and a duplex and a 3 unit.
Yeah.
Like they maybe have 6 units, or like what's your thought on that? Where should they go? What should they do? Because I think a lot of people, the majority of people that are going to be watching today, or this video, I guess, are realtors that own property, or they own a couple units.
Yeah.
Like what do you suggest? What do you think?
I think it depends on what your goals are, right? Like I talk to investors who have 50 units, they love self-managing, they love being in the weeds. I will say this, I think there's a lot of value, because you got to remember, and I'll reference this again, I think it's a valuable point here, property management is a low return on your time. So when you're self-managing, you're really not getting that great of a return. You're saving anywhere between 6 and 10% of the revenue that your properties are producing in exchange for maybe 20, 30 hours a week. Not only that, but I think there's a lot to be said for bandwidth, right? So it's not just time that's being taken up, but if you as an investor are getting that call at 8 p.m. on a Friday night.
It's almost like a morale hit more than anything.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
100%.
It's like, damn, puts you in a bad mood.
Yeah, exactly. You get a call on a Saturday and it's like, I need my toilet fixed right now. And it's just like, you don't want to have to deal with that. But they put up with that to save that 6 to 10% of revenue. And obviously that's gross revenue, but still it's something to be considered. And I think that, and again, there's a bit of a bias here, obviously, given that I'm a property manager, but I think one kind of aspect that's lost on some investors is, especially when you get to that 20, 30, 40 unit mark, unless you're like totally stabilized, you have the best tenants in the world, which is possible, you're trading your time to save that money when you could be paying someone to handle that for you so that you can dedicate that time and bandwidth to building. So it's just like, if I could, be no stress, be totally hands off, not worry about this at all, and I could focus on buying another, let's say you have 50 units. I could focus on buying another 50 units rather than taking 10, 15, 20 hours a week and sometimes my weekends to focus on this. I can take my hands off this, not worry about it whatsoever, and then focus on the things that are getting the highest return on my time. I think that's where the money is, and I think that's where property management becomes valuable. If my end all be all was being a property manager, I'd be working until I was 70. Like it's not the most profitable space to be in. I think it becomes profitable when you get to a certain size, which I'm kind of biting my words there or biting my tongue there, but also when you're integrating other aspects of real estate. So when you're investing, so on and so forth, I think even a good property manager or a good investor at a certain level is always going to hire a property manager once they're ready to be done.
I feel like getting into the GP side of things would be the most valuable, though, as a property manager.
I think that like
super delayed pay, because you're going to be operating, like if you can get into a GP with a syndicator or something,
yeah,
and take equity on that, and maybe you have a small team, like I think that like is massively valuable, but you're not going to see the return until they liquidate sell the asset or whatever it may be. But
yeah, for sure.
That sounds like.
But you have that consistent income. I think it's one of the reasons a lot of people like property management is you have that monthly revenue, because a broker, like you own property, right? But like as a broker, you have a month where you close a $60,000 commission, and then you have 2 months where you close nothing. Mm-hmm. Whereas property management, it's like, okay, I'm making this money
5%, 6%,
month in, month out. Yeah.
But again,
but 100% agree with you.
How profitable is that 6% that you got coming in? Or 7%?
GP is 100% going to be the best return of your time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I think
but you'll get the GP. So typically, you would get the GP side of it, the equity side,
mm-hmm.
whether you buy in or just you come in as whatever.
Yeah.
So you're going to have the monthly revenue from that 6%.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to have the GP side.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that like as far as the totem pole goes, this is very broad. But like I think at the bottom, the lowest return on your time is going to be, I hate to say it, but your handyman. You got your GCs. They can make great money too, but typically I feel like some GCs try to get equity splits on properties. You've got your property managers, you've got realtors, you've got investors, and you've got syndicators. And I think as far as return on time goes, it is insane how much money some of these GPs make. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is just them deferring to a property manager to stabilize properties.
Yeah.
So it is such a seamless transition from a property manager to a GP. Because one, you're providing legitimate value for the life of the investment. But two, you know how to navigate the business of owning an investment more so than I think a lot of people might be able to. So I think that if that kind of answers your question.
Yeah. So one thing that I typically see is a lot of people that own a couple units, maybe 5 units or 5 properties, whatever, they manage it themselves. They collect. Like I manage all my units myself in Wisconsin. I haven't been to them in 3 years, and I don't plan on going to them, and I don't need to. It's just worked that way with tenants. And basically the structure I've set up. But like I collect money on Zelle. All you need to do is like if you have that property and you're not in that location and can't go to it immediately, just
contractors
Google,
locally.
Just to be like plumber near me or plumber near Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And then like you pull up. And that goes to Google, and then you call 3 options, find the best quote, and send them there and take care of it.
For sure.
So, like, some of those situations, I think, and a lot of people listening are trying to buy their first property, second, or fifth. Like, they can manage it on their own if they choose to. If they're working another job and then investing on the side, that's where it might make sense to have that property manager. But what I'm saying is basically, like, you don't have to get a property manager right away when you're small. Obviously, as you scale, it's more important. But just get started, get into the game, get your cash flow going, get your assets going. Yes, when you buy that property, you're going to have to operationally increase the value, the NOI and the revenue, and that's just part of the business. It's important for every new investor or somebody that has a couple properties to be able to do that and force that value creation.
For sure. I would actually say, to your point, I would actually agree that I think anyone getting started in real estate, buying their first or second investment, I think that it would be more valuable for them to self-manage than it would be for them to hire a property manager.
I'm glad you agree.
Yeah, my point is, like, for example, I brokered a duplex last year. I helped the guy rent the property. He's actually a good friend of mine. And he was like, all right, look, he's moving up north, and he's like, all right, look, I'll give you, whatever it is, 10% of the monthly revenue. And I was like, man, I think you should manage this yourself.
You got to learn it.
Yeah.
Like, you at least have to
know
it.
Understand
you
it.
just have to know it, and then once you know it, then you're like, push it out.
Yeah, and I actually think that, again, at a certain level, it's so valuable to be able to self-manage because you're understanding the business rather than just, closing on the deal and then handing it off. Because understanding the business is really the most important part. Because that allows you to get you kind of creative with, because there are a lot of opportunities that I've seen in my brokerage days where we were only able to find such a good deal because we understood ways to add value. Like we found at one point my
Trained
previous
your eye.
broker. Exactly.
Yeah.
My previous broker had found a deal through a major multifamily brokerage that was 5 duplexes. There were 3 2s and 2 1s. And everyone was passing on the deal. And we toured it and we were like, hey, we can turn these 3 2s into 2 1s in studios. And then we immediately, within 6 months, added 5 doors. And that was just an angle that we were only able to see because of our time in the industry and experience. Yeah. So when you're getting started, it's really not, it's not super important that you have one. If you're living in Europe and like you just want to never get a call from a tenant, that's one way to handle it.
Yeah.
And I have people that I've talked to that have one single family that are moving, a couple counties over and they want to have a property manager. I'm not going to turn down business if it makes sense within the context of like my sort of the area that I'm operating in, and it's like, I can operate it well, of course. But I think that for people that are looking to like understand real estate, certainly I would self-manage your first few properties. And then when you feel like it's taking up time, and again, I think super important to mention mental bandwidth, I think that's when you start to think about hiring a property manager.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah. It was actually July 16, 2022. I sort of like went into it felt like it was technically like a panic attack. I think the medical term for it is like disassociation. And it lasted for months. Now, it completely impacted my career because I was non-functional. It's sort of a dramatic word that I use, but at the same time, like I was in a really dark space. I went to a lot of doctors to try to diagnose what was going on. Frustrating because every doctor had a different diagnosis. Everyone had a different idea of what was going on. They thought it was everything from like restless leg syndrome to like severe anxiety to all kinds of things. And of course, everyone wanted to put me on something, which pharmaceuticals certainly have their place. But I knew that there was like something causing it, and I didn't want to find something to mask the symptoms. I wanted someone to be like, here's what's causing it, and here's how you stop that cause. So it took me, I want to say October was when I finally had my first legitimate insight, and that was because I went to a functional doctor, and basically sat down. I had some suspicions because I became like a Reddit expert. Like I gained a ridiculous amount of Reddit karma. I don't know if you're familiar with how Reddit works, but I was my girlfriend at the time was always getting upset with me with the amount of time that I spent reading online. But anyways, I had a suspicion based on what I read online that I had basically it's called mold toxicity. And it was funny too, because like being in property management, you hear a lot of comments about mold. Like people are like, oh, I have mold, I want to move out. And a lot of the investors I talked to were basically like, excuse my French here, but fuck that. Like they didn't really care too much about mold or whatever. So I kind of like, I hate to use this term, but I kind of gassed up myself into like, I'm not sure this could really be it. Like, could this really be it? Like maybe I just have severe anxiety. Maybe this is just like how life is supposed to be. I got a gut test done. There were some serious problems there, but again, it was what's causing these gut problems rather than like, oh, you have gut problems now. Here, take this, drink this, or drink this, kombucha, and like everything's gonna be fine. It's way deeper than that. So I got a mold test done, and there are 5 different categories of mycotoxins. Within each category, there are a number of different types, species, as it were. And I had a presence of all 5. One of them I was in the 95th percentile. And the suspicion, we'll never be able to prove this, but my ex-girlfriend's apartment is where we think it was originating from. Now, in her defense, she lived in a very nice unit in Brickell, so it wasn't like she was living in a crappy unit.
Yeah.
It was well taken care of, and I think that like the way that the building was designed, there's a lot of carpet in the building. Her unit, not specifically, but like it would get like, we're talking like 80 degrees, 81, 82 degrees in there. And one night I brought over my air purifier, the Miele air purifier, and it literally went off the charts. The AQI is air quality index, and it goes up to, the screen goes up to 999, and hers was at like 4,000. It was incredible. I actually have the screenshots.
So that's bad, right?
That's awful.
4,000 is bad.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
0 or 1 would be the best.
1 would be like
999 is like the highest.
yeah.
Okay.
So it's called particles of matter, and they're different sizes: PM1, PM2.5, and PM10. And that's how you measure. It's basically the amount of, like, there's stuff in here right now as we speak that like we can't see. and hers was just off the charts. I think it was her PM 2.5. And then it said like you're at risk of mold because your humidity was super high. So I got this mold test. Results came back positive. I remember crying when I found out. I was so happy because it was like the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, it's the cause.
It was like, oh my god, like we're gonna be able to figure this out. Yeah. I was in the car. I pulled off to the side. I was on Miami Ave at Brickell. Okay. You know where right south of Brickell where those super nice houses are.
With the trees.
Yeah. I literally pulled off into the residential parking.
Yeah.
I cried for a second. Called my dad, and I was like, we figured it out. And then I called my girlfriend at the time. It was actually on her birthday.
That's crazy.
And I was like, you gave me the greatest gift ever. Mold poisoning. But anyway, so then the recovery process started, which it was interesting because by that point, it had severely impacted my my place at work at the property management firm I was at. And it was sad because, of course, the owner at the time definitely thought, like, this guy's slacking off. Like, it was hard to be like, hey, look, I have mold poisoning. Because people hear that and they're like, oh, yeah, you got mold poisoning. It was tough. So I ended up transitioning out. And I was like, I'm telling you, if you had told me, like, take a flight to, Africa, go to this specific tree, hang upside down for 10 minutes, and then do 30 jumping jacks, like, I would have been looking at flights before the conversation was over. I would have done anything that you had told me to do to get through that, to get through the mold. So I focused on recovery, which opened up the door to like all kinds of different things for me. I met a lot of really good people in that space that I'm still friends with, and it honestly, it's funny. The people I've read about online, the people I've talked to that have gone through similar situations, like they kind of call it the rebirth, because you never look at life the same after something like that happens to you. And I'm really grateful that it happened when it did. I was in Coconut Grove the other night looking at a family, and I was thinking, I can't imagine what that would have been like if I was the breadwinner for like my wife and 2 kids. That would have been absolutely mortifying. But information is power, knowledge is power. So now I know. And it's funny because some days like I got to understand my body better. So like some days, I think there's a lot of like snap out of it culture, which I think there's some value there. But some days like when I'm feeling not myself, I remember that sometimes there are external factors that are impacting me that are out of my control, so to speak. And it kind of helps me push through because it's like, okay, my body's trying to tell me something, right? Like everything that you experience is your body, like fatigue, for example, is your body saying like you need rest. Like you can't get rid of that. Like if you were up all the time, you'd eventually die from exhaustion. Your body's trying to say, yeah, we need to take it easy for a couple days. So I know I'm jumping all over the place, but, and I started the detox process. What's ironic about the mold is that as quickly as you can get it, as you can accumulate it, that is, it takes forever to get out because it's stored in the fat tissue, the way that I understand it. And you essentially, I take glutathione, which promotes the extraction from the fat tissue, and then I take a binder to essentially pull that from the blood, and then you pee it out. Just to be very direct about it. But you can't go too quickly because if you're pulling it out of the fat and it's recirculating and you're not getting it out as it's recirculating, then it'll just sort of stay somewhere else and it's dangerous. Okay. And it can lead to all sorts of downstream effects, like cancer being one of them. So you have to be very methodical with the detox. This morning I literally took some activated charcoal, which is like it's a binder. And a binder is just something that grabs onto toxins. I literally can't eat 90 minutes before or after. That's great. Because if I take it with like a pharmaceutical, it's basically null and void. That's so I'm sure like if I took like, some intense drug, it wouldn't completely knock it out, but it would inhibit the effects to I think to a noticeable degree. And then I got started at Crexy, and that was sort of my transition period. That was like I'm gonna start rebuilding from here. It's funny, I joined Crexy thinking it was gonna be like a walk in the park. Like I thought that was gonna be like I'm gonna work at this tech company and I'm gonna just make calls all day and make sales, and it was super stressful.
That's interesting.
There were. It's sort of a complex answer to that. There was a lot going on. I love Crexy. I just there were sort of like it was a tough product to sell. That specific product that I was selling was at its infancy. It was only like a year, maybe just shy of 2 years old. So they were working out a lot of the kinks. I know since I've left, they've added a lot of value and it's gotten even better. But it just wasn't where it needed to be, and it was hard to sell it because our competitor was CoStar, and while there was a big price difference, it was at the time it was significantly better. Actually, I bought my shares, so technically, I'll say our. I got skin in that game, so to speak.
Nice.
But I mean, it's not a meaningful amount of shares, but it's something. So
Yeah.
I'm rooting for Crexy for sure.
Okay.
And even if I didn't own the shares, like I met actually some of the best people I've ever met at Crexy, and I made a lot of really meaningful friendships. But it was just tough because it really is. It's funny. I felt like you deal with a lot of the downsides of entrepreneurship with none of the upsides. Obviously, you get some equity in the company, but like you really are like it follows you home. Like it's not like, for example, I've always been sort of jealous of people that work in, for example, a waiter. And I might be wrong about this. I've talked to a couple friends that are in the industry and they agree with it, but I'm sure it might differ for some people. But like when you clock out, you're done.
Yeah.
Like you're going home, like you're totally relaxed. There's nothing worried at all. Like when you're in a sales position like that, there's always that kind of voice like in the back of your head, like you need to be doing more. You know? Like it's just like, and it's a whole thing. But so and then that really exhausted me, and I was like, wait. The whole reason I joined this was so that I could leave work and be like, time to relax. And even though, like, I don't know, it never really ends. It never really ends. So I was like, why don't I go back into the space, have that same level of stress, but have some equity and try to build something. So I was there for 13 or 14 months. Again, met some of the greatest people I've had the pleasure to know. Still friends, people I talk to on a daily basis about real estate and beyond. And then I transitioned into starting a property management company, which was, it's funny, it's just like, they say that, and I'm sure this will resonate with you, they say that entrepreneurship is like jumping off of a cliff and learning how to fly on the way down. It's so true. The moment where I was like, maybe this is all going to work, but then most of the other moments are like, this probably won't work.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to, I was cold calling every single day, and I was fortunate enough to, I was in the sort of like, there's a part of my building where it's like a co-working space, so to speak. It's like a billiards room, I guess. I was making cold calls. Some guy walked in. He was also I overheard him talking about real estate, and I was just like, I introduced myself, and he's like, hey, I'm a developer. He's also a broker, and he was like, I want to. He's like, I need a leasing guy actually, because I told him I had a background in leasing.
There you go.
And I was like, okay. He was like, I'm gonna give you a call this weekend. We'll set up a time to sit down. At that moment, I was like, yeah, right. Like, you know how Miami is.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of people are kind of ball busters. They're kind of, like, not really serious. And I had no idea just how serious he was. He messaged me on that Saturday. He was like, Alex, let's sit down tomorrow, Sunday at 11 a.m. We sat down for probably about an hour, and he walked me through his vision for sort of the development, management, and brokerage side. And he wanted me to get involved with the management because of my experience. And that's what I've been working on since. And that's been an absolute pleasure because it's been an intro for me into the development space, which I'm just now getting into. I don't know too much about it, but I have seen some of the returns, which is enough for me to be interested.
20 to 40%.
Yeah, dude, it's crazy. And then also...
Is that the returns you're seeing? Like 20 to 40%, somewhere in there?
It depends. Like, 'cause we're looking at, like, he's doing a lot of single family throughout Florida. And...
Is it higher?
For example, I mean, I'm just trying to think. I don't know the actual percentage or the dollar amounts, but I guess... I would say probably around 40%. Like a deal recently, they put in 280 and got back the appraisal came back at like 390. So those are rough numbers, but he's doing a ton of houses like that throughout.
Is he building on the west coast of Florida?
Yeah, throughout like Florida, West Coast, kind of north of Broward County, about Palm Beach.
I know a lot of people are doing like Lehigh Acres,
Yeah.
west of Palm Beach.
Yeah, dude, it's development is where the money's at.
North of Tampa.
Yeah. It's incredible how much money is in that space. It's just mind-blowing to me.
Again, I feel like being a GC or getting into the development side of things is managing people, because you got to manage you got to manage the GC, who's got to manage the subs, high turnover rate. If you don't speak
100%.
Spanish, you might be in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah. Which I don't speak Spanish. No.
Me neither.
That's its own obstacle down here.
My last house, we flipped before this one. Bought for $710, sold for $900 cash, and the GCs though, like, I didn't speak a lick of Spanish, so I brought like 6 different GCs, and I went with the one that spoke English.
That's so funny.
And I'm like, they still overcharge me like crazy. So I don't know. I learned a lot with that first experience.
Yeah.
Development's definitely the game. I feel like in Miami,
For sure.
people want to pay for that finished product. So a lot of these properties, you look at it, it's like, yeah, it's $1 million, but if I knock that down and build something, I could sell it for 2.5 million or whatever it is, and you're higher chance of getting that 2.5 because people want that finished product.
For sure.
They're not in the real estate industry. They don't want to deal with that nonsense. They don't trust the construction business as a whole down here. Like as a whole down here.
Yeah.
Everyone always telling me, be careful of the GCs. Be careful of the GCs. Be careful of the GCs. Like,
dude, we've had some. I've seen some horror stories. We had a guy at my first property management company that I wasn't involved with the specifics, but I do know that he wasn't happy with like there was a stipulation in the agreement where every day late past when he passed a certain point, they would reduce the fee that they paid him.
And the GC?
Yeah.
That's what I did in my old house.
Yeah. So like,
heck yeah.
Yeah. So they were basically like,
incentivize that to get done.
If you're late, yeah.
Yeah.
So they were like, look, you signed this. This is how much we're gonna pay you, and he destroyed the unit.
Really?
Yeah, he went in there and like smashed the toilet. Like he literally went in.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy.
That's crazy.
And we were actually like, I remember the owner of the company, my direct report. It was like, this guy's a loose cannon. We had an office. We had a brick and mortar office, and we were like, this guy's like, he's a loose screw, like, or he has a loose screw, whatever, however you say it. But that's part of the game.
That's insane.
It's one of the reasons I love it. It's so practical. Like you're just like talking to real life people all the time. Like it's cool. There are a lot of upsides. That's one of the downsides. But that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Just like building the right team, I think is so important. Like finding the right GC. And back to like speaking English and not speaking Spanish for both of us. The developer that I'm working with, he's got a really good team, and the main guy speaks English, which I'm fortunate. And then the guys that he works with don't speak Spanish, and it's so funny because every time I get to a property, we're like excited to see each other. Like he's like, "What's up?" And then every time he just talks to me in Spanish for like 30 seconds, and I'm like, "No entiendo." Like I'm just like, I don't understand what you're trying to say right now.
Yeah.
He knows I don't speak Spanish, so it's just like, why is he trying to speak to me? But he does it every time, and like I'll like nod at him, and then if he keeps going, I got pull out Google Translate, and I'm like, just say it to them.
How was navigating the property management? So are you up in Fort Lauderdale then?
Miami.
You're in Miami?
Yeah.
So how is...
I was in Fort Lauderdale for the first management company.
But now you're back here.
Now the properties are managed for a developer, mainly in Miami.
How is navigating the management space without speaking Spanish? Because like for me, for example, before buying this house, we were looking at a 15 or 19 unit building, something like that, and the Havana for 2.5 million, I think. Came really close to pulling the trigger, actually put an offer in. Couldn't shake out the numbers though, and my big concern was, how am I going to fill this property? Like, I don't speak Spanish. Like, I feel like the only people there is going to be Spanish speaking.
For sure. I'd like to consider, no joke, I'd like to consider myself like proficient enough that I can take a phone call and be like, and if I can't understand, honestly, you just go to text. Like these days, you really aren't doing things through like email. I feel like you're doing a lot of things through text. So I'll just tell them, I'll message you or something like that, and then we go to text. We coordinate it. I just rented a unit just outside of Liberty City where the tenant speaks zero English, and it was no problem at all. So, I mean, unfortunately, that's just like it's just the reality of living in Miami. I'd love to improve my Spanish, of course, and that's been the 4 quadrants of importance. Important but not urgent for sure. It should be important and urgent, but I think it's very possible. The developer I work with, I'm always saying I need to learn Spanish, and he's like, you don't really need to learn it. There would certainly be advantages, but it's not necessary, I think, because you can navigate it without knowing it.
I know like a lot of project management positions and superintendent, I know we're talking about the construction side, but superintendent positions, project management, they require a lot of like Spanish speaking.
That makes sense.
You're dealing with the subs, and a lot of the subs are Spanish speaking. So I think that kind of the higher you get towards the top of the company, the less you need to know. But for the labor, like
if you're working,
I don't know if you could get by.
I don't think so.
The construction side, without knowing Spanish, but the property management side, that's interesting to hear your take on that. And
that's obviously in the context of leasing, right? But like if I was like the head of maintenance, for example, and I didn't speak Spanish, like that would have
probably pose
some serious obstacles. Not to say that it would not be possible. I am sure that there are people in Miami that run a successful property management company that have no knowledge of Spanish. Either you find GCs or whatever the case might be that can speak great English, or you just learn to adapt.
Yeah.
That's another side note. I think there's a lot of excitement about the advancement of AI. That's one of the things I'm most excited about, is sort of the lowering the gap in language barriers.
Sure.
It's like having like some sort of pendant where you can just like go back and forth and
Yeah.
automatically translate.
I cannot wait for that, man.
That's a cool. There's some weird animations you see online about AI, and it's just like, that's not what I'm excited about. These weird, like, they take memes and bring them to life.
Yeah.
Like that's one.
Let's get practical.
Yeah. Let's do something that's actually useful. And that's one of them. I think that'll be really cool. I still want to learn Spanish because I think that's going to still be valuable. Like, because people aren't going to want to talk through an AI machine. They're going to want to talk to someone that can understand them. But it'll at least let you get through to people that you need to talk to.
Yeah,
like,
if it's an absolute must.
Yeah, either talking to GC or going to Colombia for a bachelorship. One way or the other, you're able to